Hello everyone, I'm Tim from Tim's PC, and in this video we're going to be discussing the Core i3 10105F, which is this guy here. So, the thing about this CPU is it's one of the new CPUs that has been launched alongside the Intel 11th Gen CPUs. It's actually an extension or a refresh of the 10th generation. That's why it has the 10 at the start of the number, not 11. So it's the 10105F. So what's interesting about this CPU is essentially at under $150, it essentially sits there unopposed only by its predecessor, the 10100F. There's really nothing else at that under $150 price point that you can pick up. And just by the way, I'm talking in Australian dollars here. So I'm in Australia, so this is the location that I'm sort of talking about. So if you're from America, you'll have to adjust the numbers for your local area, but hopefully the percentages and the ratios that we discuss here are going to be pretty universal and reflected in the price. So this CPU comes in at $135 Australian, and I'm going to show you how this thing performs. So I'm just going to share the other screen with you, and we'll just move Cinebench around here so you can see it. So this is pretty much an average CPU ID result. So I've ran this about probably 15, 16 times with everything closed in the background, so it was as unadulterated as possible. And so as you can see here, 466 and 2530 on multi-thread there. So as it is a budget CPU, it's not going to be breaking any records in terms of these numbers, but it does represent really good performance for your dollar if you have under $150 to spend on a CPU. So if we look at some of the temperatures that we were getting, so I ran Cinebench a couple of times through and we were getting temperatures in the 60s there, so absolutely not a problem there at all. And with the stock cooler we're getting minimums into the mid-20s there. So granted, this is an open case, it's just on this temporary test bench on top of a motherboard box, but it gives you some idea that this CPU doesn't really get hot. However, with a multi-thread score like that, it's not like it's going to be a really strong productivity CPU. But, you know, like I say to people all the time, when it comes to productivity and rendering a video, what you're paying for with CPUs is speed, not the quality. It's not like, oh, if I render this video on an i3, it won't be as good as if I rendered it on an i7. The finished product would be the same, it's just the i7 would get the job done faster. Okay, and if we have a look, take all that into consideration, and if we go and have a look at some prices. So as we can see with the price points here, the 10105F comes in at $135, as I said. It's essentially unopposed at this $150 price point, under $150 price point, I should say. If we have a look at all items here, this will show stuff that's even out of stock. So realistically, when it comes to the 10105F, the only other CPU that's kind of a competitor to it is the Ryzen 3100. But that's coming in at $170 or $169, so it is a bit of a jump up from that spend. If you're talking, you know, if you're on a budget and you've only got under $150 to spend on a CPU, spending an extra $35, that could be, you know, the difference between getting dual channel memory and single channel memory or something like that. So you've got every dollar counts in this situation. But with a 3100, the advantage with that Ryzen SKU is that if you overclock it, you can get some really good single core performance numbers out of that chip. So that's the only thing I'll say, but good luck getting your hands on a 3100 at the moment. They're very, very hard to get your hands on. So at $169 here, they're out of stock. The only other contenders, basically, if we look at stuff that's available right now in April, we really can only compare the 10105F with SKUs up to the $200 mark. So we can compare it with the 9400F there. If we have a look on another website here, we'll have some different CPUs. We can compare it to the Ryzen 5 1600AF, the 2200G, and we can also compare it to, oh, that's more expensive again, but we can look at where Ryzen 2600 sits as well. And so if we have a look over here at the benchmark scores, so this is the CPU ID score. This is a single thread. So this is where our 10105F landed. So at 467. So it's coming in at, where's some other CPUs that we've seen? It's coming in ahead of the i5 9400F. It's coming in ahead of the Ryzen 2600X and by extension the 2600. It's beating the 3200G. We were looking at the 2200G, which is down here. It beats it by a significant portion. 1700. Where's the 1600? There it is. There's the 1600 there, 390. So where was that? It was selling for 189. So definitely not a good value proposition there. I would go with the 3100 or the 3300 if I was you when it comes to Ryzen for single threaded scores, because if we were to have a look at where they sit, 3300X. So that's what you want there. 509. I've got a 3300X on my test bench at the moment, and I can get that up to 555 single threaded with an overclock. So, you know, that's still good. But if we look at where that CPU comes in terms of price, that's $229. So that's putting it within the same sort of price range as the 11400F, which is going to get you significantly better performance when even when you overclock your 3300X. So a few things to consider there when on the budget side of things when it comes to the new Intel 11th gen CPUs. If we have a look at, one thing I didn't show you is the multi-threaded scores, which are not as exciting obviously, but if we were to look at CPUs with 8 cores, 8 threads, so it's showing you some CPUs here like the 9900KS and the 9900KF there. Those CPUs have hyperthreading enabled by default, same with the 9900K. So this is showing their results with hyperthreading turned off. So that's why they're in this mix. So we're sitting roughly here. If we compare the multi-core scores, we can see that we're not really comparing ourselves to, we're not really getting a good comparative data set here, because we're only looking at CPUs with 8 cores and 16 threads. But if we move over to 12, we can look at, where are we? Our multi-threaded score versus, say, a Ryzen 1600 multi-threaded score. So remember, the 1600 was all the way down in the single-threaded score, but it scores better when it comes to multi-core. But we're talking a 6-core, 12-thread CPU here. So it's a bit of a step up. If we were to compare it to 6-core, 6-thread CPUs, so this is like the i5 9400F, and as you can see here, the 10105 with its 4 cores, 8 threads is essentially pretty much matching the 9400F there. So that's roughly where it sits in terms of its performance. I guess the CPU I would consider it most like is probably this one, the i5 9400F. It sits pretty close in multi-threaded score, and it sits very close in single-threaded score as well. Just slightly ahead, but 7 points, that's roughly the same. So what the i3-10105F represents is essentially 9400F performance at about $130, $135. So an excellent value proposition for anyone on a budget. I would be quite happy with the results there, because if you consider what people say about say the Ryzen 3600. They say that the Ryzen 3600 is a really good gaming CPU. Well, that's what they said, like in 2020. They used to say it was the best gaming CPU, best price performance, blah, 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 blah. So we're talking $130 worth of CPU can take you within striking distance of the chip that last year people were saying is, a really good gaming CPU. So it's an excellent value proposition. Like the title of this video, I've said that, the winner by technical knockout, because obviously, it's not like a heavyweight champion. It's not knocking out any of the heavy hitters, but within its price point, it wins by technical knockout, because there's nothing essentially to oppose it. These other CPUs that are sort of in the same market, the only thing that comes close is the 3100, and like I said, it's unavailable, and also it is a bit more expensive. So it would put it out. If someone's on that much of a budget that they need to look at under $150 CPUs for their gaming rig, they're probably $35 is probably a deal breaker for them. So it's good to know that there is definitely some really good performance available on the budget end of the market. When it comes to under $500 CPUs, Intel has stolen the show. And when it comes to over $500 CPUs, AMD owns this space. Unless the only exception to that would probably be if you are after productivity on a budget, you can get something like the i9 9900, where is it? 9900KF. That's 10 cores and 20 threads for $659. That's really good price to core and threads. And if you were to compare it to like other CPUs from AMD that are at a similar price point, like we could compare it to the 5800X here, that's got 8 cores and 16 threads. So you're getting more cores and more threads with this. So when it comes to certain applications, this CPU will outshine the Ryzen. But when it comes to gaming, this CPU will outshine the 10900KF. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all in the next video.